lovies. This is the last lesson, lesson 85 for Unit 8. We are going to finish up this unit by talking about errors that can happen even when you sample well. So it may be a good idea to just revisit the unit very quickly. So we started with making sure that we have a very clear understanding of population versus sample, and that our sample must represent the population and vice versa. Then we went into methods of collecting data, and we were introduced to 3 methods: experiments, simulations, and sampling. And then we carried on this unit with sampling. Our very last unit, Unit 9, will be specifically on experiments. Simulations don't have their own unit. Well, they kind of do, but we did not do that unit. So, sampling. Bad sampling methods. We have 2 bad sampling methods: convenience sampling, and voluntary response sampling. These are both bad methods for the same reason. They result in bias, and you cannot fix bias. What exactly is bias? Well, bias happens when your sample does not represent the population. And when your sample doesn't represent the population, the value that you're trying to estimate will not be a good estimate, will not give you a good idea of what that value actually is. So compared with our bad sampling methods, we have good sampling methods. There are 3 simple ones: HAT method, technology, random digits. Those are our simple random samples. Then we have the best sampling methods, which are complex methods. So we have systematic, stratified, and cluster. We went through how to choose those samples. We compared them to each other. So we have all 4 good sampling methods. Just remember that within the SRS there are 3 types, but here you have the 4 foundational ones listed. So SRS, systematic, stratified, cluster. Just remember within an SRS 3 different methods to choose from. So now what we're ending with is errors that can occur even when you take a good sample. So there's 2 types of errors that can occur, and this is illustrated on the overview that you will complete for this unit. So you have what are called sampling errors. This is an issue with the way you collected your sample. So this is an error that has to do with your method. Non-sampling errors happen even when you use good sampling methods. So the use of bad sampling methods, and those methods are convenience and voluntary response, often lead to bias. Researchers can avoid bad methods by using chance or randomness, chance sampling, to choose their samples. Other problems in conducting sample surveys are more difficult to avoid. Note, these errors can occur even when you use good sampling methods. So notice that these 2 are connected. These are non-sampling errors or bias. So these can occur even when you take a stratified sample, even when you take a cluster sample. The first one that we are looking at is called undercoverage. This is when some members of your population are not represented in the sample. Using a convenience sample often leads to undercoverage. So convenience samples often suffer from undercoverage. An example would be well, this says most samples suffer from some amount of undercoverage. So most samples suffer from some amount. As an example, a sample survey of households will miss homeless people, prison inmates, and students in dormitories. This would also miss service members that are deployed. So if we're going to use households as our clusters or as our sample, we're still going to miss these types of people. So most samples suffer from some amount of undercoverage. Here's another example. The manager of a concert hall wants to know how often people in the community attend concerts. The manager asks 45 people standing in line for a rock concert how many concerts they attend per year. Identify the type of sample the manager is using and explain why the sample is biased. So, this is a convenience sample. Why is it a convenience sample? Because this person, this manager, just asks 45 people that are available standing in line to go to a concert. It's like the definition of convenience sample. This sample only represents, and I want you to think about this, who does this sample represent? Who can we make conclusions about based off of this sample? So this goes back to our very last lesson. If we're asking people who are standing in line for this rock concert, this sample only represents people who attended this concert. It doesn't represent all people who attend concerts. It doesn't even represent all people who attend rock concerts. This sample only represents the people that went to this specific concert. So right there, this is a horrible, horrible sample to take if you're trying to estimate how often people in the community attend concerts. There is undercoverage of people who, and we want to try to think of who would be missing from this sample that are in the community we want information from. So this will miss people who attend concerts of other genres and people who do not attend concerts. So this community is going to be made up of people that attend concerts and don't attend concerts. We have a further issue in that of the people that attended concerts, we only looked at the ones that go to rock concerts. So we're missing all the people who attend concerts other than rock concerts and all of the people who don't attend concerts. This sample will likely result in an estimate that is different than the actual value being estimated, because we know that these people attended the rock concert and probably attend other concerts. So I'm not sure if this would lead to an overestimate of the number of concerts in the community that people attend, or if it would underestimate, but I know for sure that it's probably different. And I think it'll result in an overestimate because they attended a concert and probably attend other ones, but I'm not sure. So that's why I said different. Notice in this response that I'm addressing the issue. So why this doesn't represent the population, the specific bias, it's undercoverage. And I'm telling you which direction the bias would, well, I'm not telling you which direction. I think it would be an overestimate. but I definitely know it'll be different. So in a problem, when they ask you about direction of bias, in this case, I'm thinking probably overestimate. So direction of bias just means overestimate or underestimate. So first error that can occur even with good sampling methods is undercoverage. Next up is non-response. Non-response occurs when an individual chosen for the sample is unwilling or unable to participate. Non-response to surveys often exceeds 50%. So even with good sampling, non-response is an issue. Non-response happens even with careful planning and several follow-up calls. So I'm a person that contributes to non-response. I don't answer the door when people come to the door. I expect my husband to do that. If I'm not home, I ignore them. I don't answer a phone call if I don't know the number. And even if I know that they're asking for a survey, I avoid. So I'm somebody that contributes to the non-response problem. Below we have an example. Based on 12,500 responses from 42,000 surveys sent to its alumni, a major university estimated that the annual salary of its alumni is $92,500. So the estimate that resulted from this sample is likely an overestimate of the annual salary of this university's alumni. Only 30% responded to this survey. How do I know? Well, I did 12,500 divided by 42,000 . I need another 0 on that. And got 0.2976. So my response rate, let's write this down below. My response rate was 30%, which means my non-response rate is 70%. This method is also bad. This is a voluntary response sample, but this can still happen when you use a good method. So, voluntary response, they almost always suffer from non-response. Only 30% responded, 70% did not. What is the issue with only 30% responding? Well, this 30% is not going to represent the population. I personally think that the people that responded probably responded because they're proud of their annual salary and want people to know how successful they've been since leaving the university, which is why this amount is so high. $92,500 is a very high salary. So we have people who did not respond, and I bet you a lot of those people make less than $92,000 a year. Notice that in both of these there is really no sentence frames, no standard response that we're looking for. In each one, we're trying to identify the bias, so undercoverage, non-response. Why is this an issue? Well, in this one, we're missing part of the population. Direction of bias, it's definitely going to be different. We think that it's going to lead to an overestimate. Why is this an issue? Well, because the people who probably didn't respond make less than the value that we got from the people that did respond. So this is not an accurate picture or an accurate estimate for the annual salary. So first two, these happen even when you sample well, under coverage and non-response. The next one's my favorite. So when designing a survey, it is important to word survey questions so they do not lead to biased results. Answers to poorly worded questions may not accurately reflect the opinions or actions of those being surveyed. Questions that are flawed in a way that leads to inaccurate results are called biased questions. So we always want to avoid questions that are lead to, or slanted toward a particular response. You want to avoid questions that are worded to motivate you to answer in the way they want you to, or that lead you to come to the same conclusion or the conclusion they want you to. You also want to avoid questions that are too sensitive to answer truthfully. I think this is why I like this one so much, because I personally think the most interesting information about people is often the information they don't want to tell the truth about. So I think that this one's very interesting. Okay, so this one, the second bullet point, is called response bias. If you can't answer a question truthfully, that will lead to response bias. So in this bubble, it just says another type of non-sampling problem. What this means is happens even with a good sampling method. A non-sampling problem means can happen even with good sampling methods. This occurs when people give inaccurate answers to survey questions because they can't remember or the topic is sensitive. So some topics that are sensitive are that people may lie about their age, their income, or their drug use. An example of giving inaccurate answers is that they may misremember things like how many hours they spent on the internet last week, or how many traffic lights they came to on their way home or their way to a destination that were red. So response bias is when you either can't remember, misremember, or don't want to tell the truth about a question. Question wording is the first bullet point. Question wording are ways to formulate your question so that you get the response that supports the conclusion that you want. So the wording of questions is the most important influence on the answers given to a sample survey. Confusing or leading questions can introduce strong bias. And then the rest of this worksheet is some examples. And we're going to try to figure out what's wrong or if something is wrong. So explain why the question may be biased or otherwise introduce bias into the survey. Number 1, do you brush your teeth at least twice per day and floss every day? Oh boy. That's a very sensitive question to ask. Sorry, my pen is not working. So this first question would likely suffer from response bias. If you do not brush your teeth at least twice per day and floss, you're probably not going to want to tell the truth about that because everybody knows that they should be cleaning their mouth. Nobody wants to admit that they have a dirty mouth. And I bet if you ask this question nowadays, hardly anybody's brushing their teeth because they got their mask on, so you can't see your teeth situation. So this is a sensitive question. this would result in response bias. I'm just going to write RB. Does eating nutritious whole grain food improve your health? The issue here is the word nutritious. This is question wording. You don't want to include words that have positive or negative meanings. So we should really just ask, does eating whole grain food improve your health? C. Do you ever attempt the dangerous activity of texting while driving? Yikes. This is both. First, we shouldn't be using the word dangerous, so question wording, and response bias. Because I think it's very rare that people are going to want to admit that they text while driving. We all know that we shouldn't do that. We all know that that puts ourselves and others in danger. I wouldn't want to admit that I text while I drive, and I actually try not to text while I drive because I don't want the people that I'm texting to know that I text while I drive. So I think this is both. D. How many hours do you sleep each night? No bias. This question's okay. There's no emotionally charged words. There's no leading. It's not slanted, and I don't know why you would lie about this. I mean, maybe if you stay up all night to play Fortnite and Call of Duty and you're getting 2 hours of sleep and rolling up into 1A stats, you're not going to want to be like, oh, I went to bed at 5 a.m. But in general, I think this is an okay question. E, do you agree that our school cafeteria should switch to a healthier menu? Eef. Probably shouldn't use the word healthier. Question wording. And the other issue with this is that you should not start any question with do you agree? That's leading or slanted. When you start with do you agree, that means most of the time you want people to agree. So this you can consider it leading. I don't know that I would think that's slanted. I think it's leading. You don't want to start any question with do you agree. You just want to ask, do you think our school cafeteria should switch to a different menu? Okay, next up is a multiple choice. So first one was identify the issues. Second one is multiple choice. A simple random sample of 1,200 Americans is selected, and each person is asked the following question. In light of the huge national deficit, should the government at this time spend additional money to establish a national system of health insurance? Only 39% of those responding answered yes. Oh boy. So before I even look at the options, in light of the huge national deficit, that is slanted. Should we spend additional money? So I think this question is slanted, so maybe I won't write that there. Maybe I'll write it over here on the other side. Slanted toward no. I think that this question is slanted, is worded to lead you to say no. Well, we owe a lot of money, so do I think we should spend more money to establish a national system of health insurance? No. So if I think that this is going to lead people to say no, that means I'm going to underestimate the people that say yes. So let's look at our options. Is reasonably accurate since it used a large, simple, random sample? No. I already know that this estimate is biased because it's slanted. There's an issue with question wording. So it's not going to be a accurate estimate. Needs to be larger since only about 24 people were drawn from each state. No. Probably understates the percent of people who favor national health insurance. Yes. is very inaccurate, but neither understates nor overstates. Well, how can it be very inaccurate if it doesn't under or overstate? That's dumb. And E, probably overstates the percent of people who favor. No, I don't think that that's overstating, because they worded this question so that most people would say no and very few people would say yes. So, to recap what we've been talking about in this last lesson for this unit. We've talked about population versus sample. We've talked about bad sampling methods that result in bias. And those sampling methods are specific. You can have convenient sampling and it be biased because of convenient sampling, or you can use a voluntary response sample and have bias because you used that sampling method. Then we talked about good sampling methods, and now we're ending with these errors or things that could lead to bias. The reason that we save this for last is because these are non-sampling errors. These happen even when you take a good sample. So we got undercoverage, non-response, response bias, and question wording. So undercoverage, some people are not represented, and they're different from the people that are. Non-response, a lot of people didn't answer, and those people are different than the people that did. Response bias, people are going to lie sometimes. And lastly, question wording. We can word the question to motivate people or lead people to answer the way we want. So you guys will now move in. Oh, actually, we're going to do this last page together. We're going to do check for understanding 1 and 2, and then you're going to try 3, 4, 5, 6 on your own. Okay, so a survey paid for makers of disposable diapers found that 84% of the sample opposed banning disposable diapers. So most people opposed. Yikes, that's a lot of people. Most people opposed banning disposable diapers. Well, I definitely would not ban disposable diapers because I don't want to be changing a cloth diaper. I don't want to put poopy cloths in my washing machine. I don't want to dump poopies into the toilet from the cloth diaper. So I think that I would oppose banning the disposable diapers, but I'm just saying. So 84% said that they oppose banning the diapers. Here is the actual question that was asked, though. It is estimated that disposable diapers account for less than 2% of the trash in today's landfills. Well, geez, that doesn't seem very much. Less than 2%? In contrast, beverage containers, third-class mail, and yard waste are estimated to account for 21% of the trash in landfills. Well, shoot, I threw away 3 beverage containers yesterday because we had all them waters from the Aspire test, and I kept the extra, and I've been drinking them all. So I threw away 3. I throw away all third-class mail. I don't even take it in the house. I don't throw away yard waste because I ain't about doing yard work. But husband does. He has a lot of yard waste. So we have these disposable diapers that are only 2%, and then stuff I throw away all the time. That's a much bigger percent. So, given this, in your opinion, would it be fair? Would it be fair to ban disposable diapers? Okay, family, this question should just say, do you think we should ban disposable diapers? There's so much wrong with this question. So, I have given you 2 example responses that you could write to the prompt. Explain how the wording of the question could result in bias. Then it says be sure to specify the direction. So is this an overestimate or an underestimate? So here's first option, or first example I should say, because these aren't the only 2 options. This sample is biased because of question wording. We got to write it out, though. We can't just say QW. The estimates given at the beginning of the question may lead the readers to conclude that disposable diapers are less of a problem than things most people throw away often. So I'm going to say that again. The issue here is that the estimate given at the beginning of the question, which was 2%, leads readers to conclude that diapers are less of a problem than the things most of us throw away every day, if not several times a day. So the estimate given at the beginning was the 2%. This will result in an underestimate of the actual proportion of people who oppose banning disposable diapers. I probably should have mentioned the issue with this, would it be fair? Well, if we're comparing 2% to 21%, then no, it's not fair. It's definitely not fair. Okay, here's another option. Beginning the question by giving the percentage of landfills that is accounted for by disposable diapers leads the respondent to conclude disposable diapers are not a problem because the percent is so low. The question then gives examples of waste that is seemingly more of an issue than disposable diapers. This is another statement that leads the reader to conclude disposable diapers are not a problem. This will lead to an underestimate of the actual proportion of people who oppose banning disposable diapers. Okay. Sure. Yours could have addressed the would it be fair and none of this other stuff, and you would have been fine. So giving the percent of diapers that's way less than the percent of the other things they gave would definitely lead people to believe, well, no, that's not fair. If you're comparing 21% to 2%, not fair. So you could have described that in your response. Okay, then the last problem is my favorite one because it's a true story. So it's called The Demise of the Literary Digest. So the Literary Digest was an influential American general interest weekly, which is a magazine, that was in print from 1890 to 1938. So 48 years, almost 50 years, this magazine was in print. The weekly is best remembered today for the circumstances surrounding its demise. In 1936, the Digest conducted a sample survey regarding the outcome of the 1936 presidential election between Alfred Landon, that's this dude, and Franklin D. Roosevelt, this dude. It had correctly predicted the winner of the past 5 presidential elections. So they predicted correctly the past 5. Their survey showed that Alfred was likely, it says that the Alfred, just that Alfred was likely to be the overwhelming winner. So now everybody's thinking, well, Alfred's going to win because this magazine has predicted the winner for the last 5 elections. That's what, 20 years? For the past 20 years, they've been right. So for sure, Landon is going to win this election. Well, November rolls around. The election resulted in Landon carrying only 2 states. Meanwhile, Roosevelt carried the other 46 states. The magazine did not recover from making this mistake and stopped publishing 2 years later. So after they predicted the election wrong, they lost most of their readership. That's a doozy. So what went wrong? Well, the Literary Digest surveyed first its readers. So the first people they surveyed was their own readers, and then they used two other lists, registered automobile owners and telephone directories. Okay, so let's think about this. This would be convenience, because in order to include other people, you got to go all over the place. You got to go all over every state to make sure that you have a representative sample. The people who can afford a subscription to a weekly magazine, can afford a telephone, can afford an automobile, those people are going to be different than people who can't afford an automobile, who can't afford a telephone, who can't afford spending money on a magazine every week. And I'm sure that was a lot of people back in 1936. We're headed right into the Depression, family. So, convenient sample. They just chose lists and used those lists to ask people who they were going to vote for. Because otherwise, they would just have to be driving all around every state and randomly picking people to survey. So, they would have to go out to the rural areas with no telephone poles. And they're still driving around horses instead of cars. So, this survey was a convenience sample. Oh, I forgot to say, they sent surveys to 10, they sent our surveys. We didn't send out no survey. They sent surveys to 10 million individuals and ended up with a sample size of 2.4 million. Okay. Well, 2.4 million is like a response rate of 24%. That's not very great. The survey was a convenience sample that suffered from under coverage. The sample resulted in under coverage of low income voters. And those low income voters tended to be Democrats. So this was under coverage of low-income voters because people who owned cars and telephones tended to be more affluent. Those guys were Republicans. Most of the low-income voters were Democrats. It also suffered from non-response. 24% responded, which means 76% did not. And it turns out respondents tended to be Landon supporters, whereas the non-responders tended to be Roosevelt supporters. Since only 24% of the sampled voters completed the mail-in survey, the survey results overestimated, grossly overestimated, the voter support for Landon. So, bad sampling method, we had under coverage, we had non-response. All of these things cost this Literary Digest their company, their existence. Very interesting to me. Real life, true story. Okay, now moving into your check for understanding. Since there is no sentence frames for how to describe what's going wrong, you're going to try to just do the best that you can. You want to make sure that you identify. In fact, you could actually go back to the Post-it note that we did here. You want to indicate that the sample does not represent the population. Why? Is it under coverage? Is it response bias? Is it question wording, or is it non-response? So you could even add those in now. We have under coverage, non-response, My favorite, response bias or question wording. And then you want to say direction of the bias. It leads to an overestimate or an underestimate of the actual. So in most cases, I think that if you needed a template to follow, this would be a really good template. Okay, that's it. Love you.